The autumn wind cut through downtown's glass towers like a blade, carrying the scent of expensive coffee and exhaust fumes. Jake Sullivan stepped into the alley behind Meridian, pulling his worn chef's coat tighter against the chill. His hands, permanently stained with burns and cuts from 15 years in kitchens, fumbled for the cigarette pack in his pocket. His one vice, his 5-minute escape from the relentless pace inside. That's when he heard it. A soft whimpering, almost lost beneath the city's constant hum. A small boy sat hunched against the brick wall, knees drawn to his chest, tears streaming down flushed cheeks. Maybe 6 years old, dressed in clothes that cost more than Jake's monthly rent. Crisp khakis, a navy sweater with some prep school emblem, tiny leather shoes that had never seen a playground. Jake's cigarette remained unlit. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away. In this neighborhood, with these people, a working-class man approaching a crying child was a recipe for disaster. But the kid's shoulders shook with each sob, and Jake saw his own son, Ethan, in that vulnerable posture. "Hey there, buddy." Jake crouched down, keeping his distance. "You okay?" The boy looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm hungry. Maria said she'd be right back, but that was forever ago." "Maria's your nanny?" A nod. "She went to get her medicine. I waited and waited, but my tummy hurts." Jake glanced around the empty alley. No concerned adults rushing to claim this lost child. Just another kid caught in the crossfire of adult responsibilities, abandoned by circumstance. "What's your name?" "Tommy Morrison." Morrison. Jake knew that name. Everyone in the city did. The tech billionaire family whose donations funded half the cultural district. "Well, Tommy, I work right here." Jake gestured toward the restaurant's back entrance. "How about we get you something to eat while we wait for Maria?" Tommy's face brightened for the first time. "Really?" Inside Meridian's gleaming kitchen, Jake moved with practiced efficiency. The dinner rush wouldn't start for 2 hours, giving him precious time. He pulled ingredients from the walk-in cooler: good butter, artisanal bread, aged cheddar that cost $40 a pound. "What are you making?" Tommy perched on a clean prep stool, legs swinging. "Grilled cheese. Same thing I make my son when he's sad." "You have a son?" "Ethan. He's 7. Jake's voice softened. "Lives with his mom most of the time." The butter sizzled in the pan, filling the kitchen with warmth. Jake worked slowly, deliberately, the way he'd learned to cook for Ethan during their weekend visits, when every meal became a chance to show love through food. "My mom's always working," Tommy said quietly. "She has really important meetings." Jake flipped the sandwich, watching the bread turn golden. "Moms work hard to take care of us. Sometimes they just need help." "Like you're helping me?" "Yeah, buddy. Like I'm helping you." The sandwich emerged perfect, crispy outside, melted inside. Jake cut it diagonally the way kids preferred and slid the plate across the steel counter. Tommy bit into it, and his whole face transformed. "This is the best sandwich ever." Jake smiled, remembering Ethan's identical reaction last Sunday. Secret ingredient is caring about who you're cooking for. As Tommy ate, Jake's mind wandered to his own struggles. The custody battle that drained his savings, the double shifts to afford his cramped apartment, the constant weight of proving he was enough for his son despite having so little. "Are you gonna stay with me until Maria comes back?" "Of course." But even as Jake said it, unease crept up his spine. In this world of privilege and suspicion, kindness could be misinterpreted. Good intentions could become accusations. Still, watching Tommy's contented smile, Jake pushed those fears aside. Some things mattered more than consequences. 20 minutes later, the kitchen's peaceful bubble shattered like dropped crystal. "Tommy! Tommy!" A woman's voice pierced through the restaurant's back entrance, sharp with panic and accusation. Maria burst through the door, a middle-aged Latina woman clutching a pharmacy bag, her face twisted with terror. Her eyes locked onto Tommy sitting beside Jake, and the color drained from her cheeks. "Oh my God! What have you done?" She rushed forward, snatching Tommy from the stool with trembling hands. "I told you to wait outside." "But Maria, I was hungry and—" "Shh, Mijo, don't say anything." Maria's voice cracked as she pulled out her phone with shaking fingers. Mrs. Morrison? I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. There's been a situation. Jake stood slowly, his chef's coat suddenly feeling like a target painted on his back. The familiar weight of judgment pressed down on him. The same feeling he'd carried through custody hearings, job interviews, every interaction where his worn clothes and calloused hands spoke before he could. Ma'am, I can explain. Don't. Maria held up her hand, phone pressed to her ear. Mrs. Morrison, please come immediately. Tommy is... He's with someone. A man. In the restaurant kitchen. The way she said a man made Jake's stomach turn. Not a chef who helped. Not someone who fed your hungry child. Just a man. Loaded with implications, dripping with suspicion. Tommy looked confused, sandwich still clutched in his small hands. But Jake made me food. I was crying and... Quiet, Tommy. Maria's eyes never left Jake, as if he might vanish with the child at any moment. 15 minutes stretched like hours. Jake remained motionless, knowing any sudden movement would be misinterpreted. The kitchen staff began filtering in for dinner prep, their conversations dying as they sensed the tension crackling through the air. Then Catherine Morrison arrived like a storm front. She swept through the entrance flanked by 2 security guards, her Armani suit and diamond earrings catching the fluorescent lights. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her blue eyes, the same shade as Tommy's, blazed with maternal fury and something darker. Where is he? Her voice could have cut steel. Mommy! Tommy wiggled free from Maria's grip and ran toward his mother. But Catherine's gaze was fixed on Jake. She took in his appearance with surgical precision. The faded chef's coat with small burn holes, the scuffed work boots, the exhaustion etched into his face from too many double shifts. Her lip curled almost imperceptibly. You! The word fell like a gavel. What did you do to my son? Mrs. Morrison, don't speak. She knelt and grabbed Tommy's shoulders, her manicured nails stark against his small frame. Tommy, did this man touch you? Did he hurt you? No, Mommy. He made me the best sandwich and... What did I tell you about talking to strangers? Her voice rose, echoing off the stainless steel surfaces. Especially men like this? Men like this. The phrase hung in the air like poison gas. Jake felt every eye in the kitchen turn toward him, measuring him against Catherine's words. Men like this, poor men, desperate men, men who couldn't afford the armor of wealth and respectability. Ma'am, your son was hungry and alone. You just what? Saw an opportunity? Catherine rose to her full height, her security guards stepping closer. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? The threat was clear. Jake's hands clenched at his sides, every instinct screaming to defend himself. But he knew the rules of this game. In her world, his word meant nothing. His intentions were irrelevant. His very existence in proximity to her child was evidence of guilt. I have a son too, Jake said quietly. I know what it's like when a kid needs help. Catherine's laugh was sharp as broken glass. You think that makes this acceptable? You think that gives you the right? The kitchen had gone silent except for the hum of refrigeration units. Jake could feel his co-workers' discomfort, their relief that they weren't in his position, their calculation of whether supporting him was worth the risk. I'm calling the police, Catherine announced, pulling out her phone. And my lawyers. Tommy tugged at his mother's sleeve, tears starting fresh. Mommy, why are you being mean to Jake? He was nice to me. But Catherine wasn't listening to her son anymore. She was staring at Jake with the cold certainty of someone who had already decided his guilt, his punishment, his worth. The kitchen walls seemed to close in as Jake realized how quickly his life was about to change. Catherine's fingers flew across her phone screen with the precision of someone accustomed to wielding power through technology. Each tap was a weapon being loaded, each swipe a door being slammed shut on Jake's future. I want every second of security footage from the last 2 hours, she barked into the phone. And I want your best investigators here within the hour. Someone allowed a predator access to my child. The word predator hit Jake like a physical blow. He watched Catherine pace the kitchen's perimeter, her heels clicking against the tile with military precision. She moved like a general surveying a battlefield, and he was the enemy combatant who had somehow infiltrated her fortress. "Mrs. Morrison, please?" Jake's voice cracked slightly. "I understand you're upset, but if you just listen, listen." Catherine whirled around, her blue eyes blazing with contempt. "Listen to what? Your excuses? Your sob story about being a struggling single father." She spat the words like they tasted bitter. "Do you think I'm naive? Do you think I don't know how men like you operate? Men like you." There it was again, that phrase that reduced Jake to a stereotype, a threat assessment based solely on his bank account and zip code. In Catherine's world, poverty was a character flaw, desperation was dangerous, and anyone who couldn't afford her lifestyle was automatically suspect. Tommy tugged at his mother's designer jacket, his small voice barely audible above the kitchen's industrial hum. "Mommy, Jake didn't do anything bad. He just made me food because I was crying." Catherine knelt down, but her eyes remained fixed on Jake like a predator watching prey. "Tommy, sweetheart, sometimes bad people pretend to be nice. They give you things to make you trust them." But he wasn't pretending. "He told me about his little boy and—" "Enough." Catherine's voice cut through Tommy's protest like a blade. "You don't understand these things. You're too young to recognize manipulation." The casual dismissal of her son's experience sent a chill through the kitchen. Jake watched Tommy's face crumple, confusion replacing the joy he'd shown just minutes earlier. The child was learning a harsh lesson about how the world worked, that his voice, his truth, his experience mattered less than his mother's prejudices. "You see this?" Catherine gestured toward Jake's appearance with disgust. "The torn clothes, the desperation in his eyes? This is exactly the kind of person who targets vulnerable children. Someone with nothing to lose." Jake's hands trembled with suppressed rage. Every assumption she made was a knife twist, every word a reminder of how society viewed him. His poverty wasn't a circumstance, it was evidence of moral failing. His kindness wasn't genuine, it was calculated manipulation. His very existence in her child's proximity was proof of criminal intent. "I work 3 jobs to support my son," Jake said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "I've never hurt a child in my life." "3 jobs," Catherine laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "And still can't afford decent clothes? Still can't provide stability? That desperation makes you dangerous. It makes you willing to do anything." The security guards shifted closer, their hands resting casually on their belts. Jake could feel the noose tightening, could see his future collapsing with each passing second. In Catherine's world, his guilt was predetermined by his circumstances. The trial had already happened in her mind, and the verdict was written in the contempt on her face. "The police are on their way," she announced, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had just solved a problem. "And my legal team. By tomorrow, everyone will know what kind of establishment allows predators near children." Tommy began crying again, overwhelmed by the tension crackling through the air. But Catherine didn't comfort him. She was too busy orchestrating Jake's destruction, too consumed with her righteous fury to notice her son's distress. Jake stood motionless in the center of the kitchen, surrounded by stainless steel and judgment, watching his life unravel because he had dared to show kindness across class lines. The sound of approaching sirens began to echo through the downtown canyon, growing louder with each passing second. The sirens grew louder, and the kitchen staff began making their calculations. Jake could see it in their faces, the quick glances, the subtle steps backward, the way conversations died mid-sentence. In the brutal mathematics of survival, loyalty was a luxury few could afford. Marcus, the sous chef, was the first to break. He'd worked alongside Jake for 3 years, shared cigarettes during breaks, complained about their impossible schedules. Now he busied himself with prep work, eyes fixed on his cutting board as if Jake had become invisible. "I got kids to feed," Marcus muttered to no one in particular. "Can't afford to get mixed up in this." But Rosa, the dishwasher who sent half her paycheck to family in El Salvador, stepped closer to Jake. Her weathered hands gripped a towel like armor, and her voice carried the weight of someone who understood what it meant to be judged by circumstances beyond your control. "Jake's a good man," she said quietly, her accent thick with conviction. "He helped my nephew get a job when no one else would." The kitchen divided along invisible lines, those who could afford principals and those who couldn't. The younger servers, still living with parents, whispered support. The older cooks with mortgages and medical bills found urgent tasks elsewhere. David Chun, the head chef, stood frozen in the doorway like a man watching his world collapse. His restaurant had taken 15 years to build, every review and reputation carefully cultivated. One phone call from Catherine Morrison could destroy it all. "Jake," David's voice cracked, "maybe you should take some time off until this gets sorted out." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Even David, who'd promoted him, who'd trusted him with the evening shift, was cutting him loose. The message was clear. Jake's years of loyalty meant nothing when weighed against Catherine Morrison's influence. "You're firing me?" Jake's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm protecting the business," David replied, unable to meet his eyes. "You understand." Jake understood perfectly. In the ecosystem of wealth and power, he was expendable. His story didn't matter. His character was irrelevant. He was collateral damage in a war he never chose to fight. The police sirens reached crescendo as squad cars pulled up outside. Through the kitchen's small window, Jake could see the flashing lights painting the alley walls red and blue, colors that had never meant safety for someone like him. Catherine Morrison stood triumphant in the center of the kitchen, her phone already buzzing with calls from reporters who'd caught wind of the story. She was orchestrating his destruction with the efficiency of a corporate takeover. "Officers," she called out as footsteps echoed through the restaurant. "In here. I want this man arrested immediately." Jake's hands hung at his sides, empty and defeated. Around him, his former colleagues avoided eye contact, their silence a verdict more damning than any jury could deliver. The kitchen door swung open, and Jake's fate walked through. Officer Martinez entered the kitchen with the measured pace of someone who'd seen too many domestic disputes turn violent. His partner, Officer Walsh, flanked him, hand resting casually on his radio. They surveyed the scene, the billionaire in designer clothes, the chef in stained whites, the child caught between two worlds. "Ma'am, we got a call about a possible incident involving a minor?" Catherine stepped forward, her voice crisp with authority. "This man lured my son into the kitchen. I want him arrested for attempted kidnapping." Jake's stomach dropped. The words "attempted kidnapping" would follow him forever, regardless of the outcome. In the court of public opinion, accusation was conviction. "Sir, I need you to step over here," Martinez said, his tone neutral but firm. As Jake moved toward the wall, David Chun cleared his throat. "Officers, we have security cameras. Maybe we should review the footage before." "Excellent idea," Catherine interrupted. "The footage will show exactly what this predator did to my son." The restaurant's security monitor flickered to life, displaying grainy black and white images of the alley. Catherine stood rigid, arms crossed, waiting for vindication. Jake closed his eyes, knowing that even video evidence might not save him from the narrative she'd already constructed. The footage began to play. There was Tommy, small and alone, shoulders shaking with sobs. Then Jake appeared, cigarette forgotten, approaching slowly with his hands visible. The audio was poor, but his body language spoke volumes. The careful distance he maintained, the way he crouched to Tommy's eye level, the gentle gestures of someone trying to comfort a frightened child. Catherine's confident expression began to waver as she watched Jake guide Tommy inside. On screen, her son's face transformed from despair to wonder as Jake moved through the kitchen with practiced care. The chef's movements were deliberate, tender, the same way he'd cook for his own child. "Look at his face," Tommy whispered, tugging at his mother's sleeve. "I was so happy." On the monitor, Jake knelt beside Tommy's stool, cutting the sandwich with the precision of someone who understood that presentation mattered to children. Tommy's legs swung freely, his earlier tears replaced by animated chatter. The interaction was unmistakably paternal, protective, nurturing. genuine. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't the predatory behavior she'd imagined. This was a father recognizing another parent's child in distress and responding with instinctive kindness. "He told me about his little boy," Tommy said quietly. "He said his name was Ethan and that he missed him." The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. She watched Jake's face on the screen, saw the sadness that flickered across his features when Tommy asked about his son. This wasn't manipulation. This was a man sharing his own pain to comfort a lonely child. "I work 3 jobs," Jake said, his voice barely audible in the silent kitchen. "Weekends at a catering company, mornings at a diner, evenings here. I see Ethan every other weekend, and it's never enough." His voice cracked. "When I saw Tommy crying, I saw my son. I saw every kid who's ever been forgotten while adults handle their business." Catherine stared at the monitor, watching her son laugh as Jake performed some small kitchen magic, probably the way the cheese stretched when he lifted the sandwich. Tommy's joy was infectious, pure, untainted by the suspicions that had consumed her. "Mommy," Tommy's voice was small, confused. "Why were you so mad at Jake? He was just being nice." The question hung in the air like an accusation. Catherine looked around the kitchen, at the officers waiting for her decision, at the staff avoiding eye contact, at Jake standing against the wall like a condemned man. For the first time since arriving, she really saw him. Not the threat she'd imagined, but a tired father who'd recognized a child's need and responded with the only thing he had to offer: kindness. The security footage continued playing, but Catherine had stopped watching. She was staring at Jake, seeing him clearly for the first time, and the weight of her assumptions pressed down on her like a physical force. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Catherine's manicured fingers trembled as she reached for her phone, ending the call to her lawyers with a whispered, "Never mind. Officers, there's been a misunderstanding." Her voice cracked on the words. "No charges need to be filed." Officer Martinez nodded curtly. "You sure about that, ma'am? Once we leave, you can't change your mind again." "I'm sure." As the police departed, the kitchen felt cavernous, empty except for the weight of unspoken truths. Catherine turned toward Jake, her designer armor suddenly feeling like a costume she no longer recognized. "I'm sorry," she began, but Jake held up his hand. "Are you? Or are you just sorry you got caught being wrong?" The question hit like a slap. Catherine had expected gratitude, perhaps even forgiveness. She hadn't expected to be challenged by someone she'd just tried to destroy. "I misjudged the situation." "No." Jake's voice was steady, controlled, but underneath lay years of accumulated pain. "You didn't misjudge anything. You saw exactly what you expected to see. A poor man near your rich kid, and you assumed the worst." Catherine's mouth opened, then closed. Around them, the kitchen staff pretended to work while hanging on every word. "You think this is about one mistake?" Jake continued. "This is my life, Mrs. Morrison. Every day, people like you look at people like me and see a threat. We're dangerous because we're desperate. We're suspicious because we can't afford to look respectable." The words carved through Catherine's defenses like a blade through silk. She'd built her empire on reading people, on understanding motivations and weaknesses. But she'd never considered how her wealth had blinded her to the humanity of those without it. "I have a son too," Jake said quietly, "and every time I pick him up from school, I see the other parents watching me, wondering what someone like me is doing in their neighborhood, calculating whether I belong." Catherine felt something crack inside her chest, a wall she'd built without realizing it, a barrier between her world and everyone else's. "I never thought—" "That's the problem," Jake interrupted. "You never had to think about it. Your money protects you from ever having to see us as human." The truth of it settled over Catherine like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. She'd spent her life believing her success made her superior, that poverty was a choice rather than a circumstance. "How do I fix this?" she whispered. Jake looked at her for a long moment, seeing something in her face that hadn't been there before. Genuine remorse, perhaps even the beginning of understanding. You start by admitting that your assumptions almost destroyed an innocent man's life. By morning, the story had metastasized across social media like a virus. Someone had leaked security footage, and #GrilledCheesegate was trending nationwide. The narrative split along predictable lines, those who saw Jake's kindness and those who questioned his motives. Jake's phone buzzed incessantly with calls from reporters, activists, and strangers offering both support and condemnation. He'd turned it off after the fifth death threat, but the damage was already spreading through his neighborhood like wildfire. At Ethan's school pickup, the other parents formed their usual clusters, but now their whispered conversations stopped when Jake approached. Some nodded with newfound respect. They'd seen the footage, understood the injustice. Others pulled their children closer, their body language screaming what their polite smiles wouldn't say. "We don't trust you. Daddy. Why are people saying mean things about you on the computer?" Ethan's 7-year-old voice carried the weight of confusion that no child should bear. Jake knelt on the sidewalk, ignoring the stares from other families. Sometimes people make judgments about others based on things that don't matter, like how much money someone has or what kind of clothes they wear. But you're a good daddy. I know, buddy. And you know, that's what matters. But even as Jake said the words, he felt their inadequacy. In a world where perception shaped reality, being good wasn't enough. Being right wasn't protection. The court of public opinion had no appeals process. Back at Meridian, the restaurant had become an unlikely battleground. Protesters gathered outside, some supporting Jake, others demanding accountability for allowing predators near children. David Chun stood behind the bar, watching his life's work become a symbol in a war he'd never wanted to fight. "We're getting calls from investors," David told Jake during an emergency meeting. "Some want to pull funding. Others want to make you the face of working-class dignity." He rubbed his temples. "I don't know which is worse." The irony wasn't lost on Jake. He'd become famous for feeding a hungry child, the most basic human instinct, and now that simple act was being dissected by strangers who'd never worked a double shift or chosen between groceries and rent. Local news crews camped outside Jake's apartment building, turning his neighbors into reluctant participants in a national conversation about class and character. Mrs. Rodriguez from 3B defended him to anyone who'd listen, while Mr. Peterson from the first floor muttered about troublemakers bringing chaos to their quiet building. "The thing is," Rosa said during her break, speaking to a reporter who'd cornered her outside the restaurant, "Jake never asked for any of this. He just saw a kid who needed help. That's what good people do." But goodness, Jake was learning, was a luxury that society only extended to those who could afford its consequences. For people like him, kindness came with a price tag he was still calculating. The evening news played on the restaurant's television, showing split-screen images of Jake and Catherine Morrison. The cheer-in read, "Billionaire versus Chef, a tale of two Americas." Jake stared at his own face on the screen, wondering when helping a child had become a political statement, when basic human decency had become a class issue. Outside, the protesters' chants grew louder, their voices carrying through the downtown canyon like a modern-day Greek chorus, narrating a tragedy that was far from over. The story was no longer about a sandwich. It had become about everything else. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of Sullivan's kitchen, casting golden light across mismatched tables and hand-painted walls. The small restaurant hummed with quiet energy, the sound of coffee brewing, eggs sizzling, and conversations flowing between neighbors who might never have spoken otherwise. Jake stood behind the open kitchen counter, watching a familiar scene unfold. Tommy Morrison sat at the corner table, carefully spreading butter on bread under the watchful eye of Maria Santos, a single mother from the neighborhood whose daughter attended the same after-school program. "Remember me, Joe?" Maria said gently. "The butter goes all the way to the edges. That's how Chef Jake taught us." The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Catherine Morrison's public apology had been just the beginning, a painful reckoning broadcast live, where she'd admitted her prejudices and committed to change. But words were easy. Action required sustained effort. "Jake, the foundation approved funding for 10 more scholarships," Catherine said, sliding into the seat across from him during the lunch lull. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, a far cry from the armor of designer suits she'd once hidden behind. The Morrison Foundation's Working Families Initiative had become Catherine's obsession, funding childcare, job training, and small business loans for single parents. Jake's restaurant was her first investment, but not her last. Tommy's been asking if he can help with Saturday's cooking class, Catherine continued, watching her son demonstrate proper grilled cheese technique to a group of fascinated children. Jake smiled, remembering his initial terror at the idea of teaching kids to cook. Now, watching 8-year-olds from the project's work alongside children from private schools, he understood the power of shared experience. Hunger was universal. Kindness transcended zip codes. "He's welcome anytime," Jake said. "Kids got good instincts." Through the window, Jake could see the mural that had appeared on the building across the street, a vibrant painting showing hands of different colors sharing a meal. The artist had been anonymous, but the message was clear. Community was a choice, not an accident. "You know what I learned?" Catherine asked, watching Tommy help a younger child reach the stove. "Privilege isn't just about having money. It's about having the luxury to remain ignorant of other people's struggles." Jake nodded, thinking of all the assumptions that had nearly destroyed both their lives. The incident had taught them both that understanding required more than good intentions. It demanded the courage to examine uncomfortable truths about themselves and society. As the afternoon crowd began to gather, Jake returned to his kitchen, where the simple act of feeding people had become something larger, a bridge between worlds that had seemed impossibly far apart. The grilled cheese sandwiches still tasted the same, but everything else had changed.